Welcome, foolish mortals. This is actually take 2 of this week's version of the Villain's Lair. I had to close that window because it was so bright that my image was like nothing but glowy, heavenly streaks, and as angelic as that made me feel, it made it a little hard to watch the video, even for me recording it, so I can't imagine what it'd be like for you guys. So take 2 for today, and today's villain is going to be Ernesto De La Cruz. This is the primary antagonist from Disney's Coco, which was super fun to watch. I wasn't really expecting much when I saw it, so it was kind of nice to be surprised in that arena. De La Cruz is kind of what I call a switcheroo villain, meaning he's more in the line of Hans from Frozen or Professor Callahan from Big Hero 6. He's not somebody you think is the antagonist as you're watching the film until probably, I want to say, 1/2 to 2/3 of the way through the film when you find out the truth. This is as opposed to villains like Scar, Hades, or Mother Gothel, who you know immediately, hey, that's the bad guy. Nope. This one, they're all sneaky sneak. So, we've got the 2 categories. The villain that is the kind of grandiose villain that you know from the beginning because, they kidnap a child or they're, a dark, black-haired, scary-looking lion as opposed to the majestic Mufasa or, big tip-off, they're purple or blue. I don't know why. That means you're a bad guy, usually. So, De La Cruz is not one of these. He's not one that you can pinpoint immediately that he's the villain. You actually think that he's going to be Miguel's salvation for most of the film, and it's not until, like I said, quite a ways into the movie that you find out that he's not everything that he seems. Up until this point, you think that Miguel's great-grandmother is kind of awful, and that the, movie may be villain-free, and that the conflict is going to be Miguel overcoming his difficulties. Disney has a few movies like this where the main conflict really has to do with growth of the primary character rather than having a big villain, kind of character. I want to say with like Wreck-It Ralph 2, unless you consider Ralph himself the actual villain, there's a lot of kind of misdirects for mini villains, but there's no actual one grandiose villain. The villain is the hero overcoming their own obstacles. And so there are those kind of Disney movies. And so part of the way through this movie, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be one of those because it hasn't pinpointed a villain yet, and yet Miguel has tons of struggles, issues with communication. You're thinking, okay, this is going to be one where, the hero kind of is his own worst enemy. Nope, not that. We have Ernesto De La Cruz. He is very handsome, very charming, very talented, and so far the only villain in our series that, when reading their Disney description, are actually described as a sociopath. I find that significant because Cruella de Vil, who we covered a few weeks ago, she is a sociopath in the original literary roots of her character. Like, she's a sociopath in the 101 Dalmatians storybook, but Disney does not officially describe her as such. So for Disney to go ahead and be like, oh no, this guy is a sociopath, that's pretty big. Like, usually they take their villains from their fairy tales, from their literary inspirations, and they kind of gentle them down a little bit. They usually do, like what we talked about last week with Oogie Boogie, where they'll take a villain and they give them some good features, some bad features, and just have the bad ones, like, way outweigh the good ones. But, nope, guy's a sociopath. That means I've heard people use the phrase candy-coated crap before. I don't like to use that phrase, but that's kind of how it is. It's somebody who can turn on the charm. Like, they can have great people skills, but these people skills are directed solely at self-gain. Like, they can act and seem and even feel like they care about you, but they don't. It's all about them. It's like that phrase where you make fun of teenage girls, where you say that they're saying, oh, well, but that's enough about me. What do you think about me? Ernesto De La Cruz is that kind of person. He's super wrapped up in himself. I think to the point where he doesn't even realize how vain he truly is. He was so famous for his talent and good looks while he was living that people go on and remember him. And as you see throughout the story of Coco, keeping those memories alive, especially on the Day of the Dead, is what grants people possessions in the afterlife and what makes their afterlife continue onward. And so, he's basically got this kind of immortality going for him, and he's the wealthiest guy in, I don't want to say the underworld because that makes it sound like they're like in Hades or, that other place. This is really more like a limbo kind of situation. But, he's a very prominent figure because so many people remember him, and he enriched himself so much during his life that he continues to be enriched in his death. And this is enriched not in the sense of he acquired tons of, possessions during his life, but that he fooled so many people into loving him, and their love, their memory of him is what is making him continue to be wealthy and live on forever in the afterlife. This love, this memory, this talent, as we discover throughout the movie, the movie, is a complete scam. He's a terrible guy. He really doesn't even have the amount of talent that you believe him to have at the beginning, because Hector is the one who writes all of his songs. And of course Hector is, Miguel's real great-great-grandfather. Miguel thinks that it's De La Cruz the whole time because of his guitar, but the guitar was stolen from Hector. So the whole time, Miguel is very affectionate to the wrong man. And you're relieved when Miguel finds De La Cruz because he seems affectionate to Miguel as well, almost immediately accepting, I have a great-great-grandson. I'm super excited. I love this guy. The problem is, it just seems like De La Cruz would be at least somewhat aware if he had an heir. Like, Hector's perfectly aware that he has Coco. How is De La Cruz not aware that he might have an heir? Like, he seems surprised that he has a great-great-grandson, but he also just rolls with it. Seems like, you'd be a little more aware of what was going on. Who knows? Yeah. Let's see. So, quickly after meeting De La Cruz, we learn that he poisoned Hector in order to gain his book of his songs, his guitar. He basically not only poisoned Hector to obtain all of his things, but also to prevent him from returning to his family. He felt betrayed by Hector because with somebody like him, who is a narcissist and a sociopath, somebody simply doing what is best for them, for their life, they see that as a betrayal, when really Hector's decision was not about Ernesto. It wasn't about betraying Ernesto. He didn't want to hurt his feelings. He didn't want to harm his friend. He was just doing what he knew was the right thing to do, and that was to go back to his family. But Ernesto, like a true narcissist, made it about him. He saw this as Hector personally betraying him, even though it had nothing to do with him. He made it about him and used that betrayal as an excuse to kill his friend and take all of the songs that he had written up until that point, including the song that he had written for his daughter that he was attempting to return to in the first place. It's terrible. Ernesto is basically designed to be kind of a dark mirror of what Hector and even Miguel can become if they give in to their urge to put music above everything else in their lives. This is not to say that participating in music is bad. As we see throughout the entire movie, music does kind of cause a lot of hardship, or rather is blamed for a lot of hardship. It doesn't actually cause it, it's an inanimate thing, but is blamed for a lot of hardship in Miguel's family. And so it's kind of, while it's misdirected hardship, it is something that can be a struggle for people. My brother once told me, you can become addicted to anything that you can sense. And in this case, it could be an addiction to music that drove Hector to leave his family behind, and almost did the same for Miguel. But that risk could turn them into someone like De La Cruz, who puts their own self-interest ahead of everything else. Let's see. So a sociopath is defined as a person with a personality disorder manifesting itself in extreme antisocial attitudes and behavior and a lack of conscience. And we see this with De La Cruz when he says to Miguel, who is outraged because, De De La Cruz thought 5 minutes ago that Miguel was his grandson. Now he's ready to kill the kid just because the kid happened to overhear what actually happened to Hector. So he goes from, oh, I love you so much, to, by the way, you should just die, literally in just a few lines, like probably 2 minutes of the movie. That alone is kind of representative that there's something not right with this guy. Because, I mean, you can get pretty mad at somebody, but you don't go from I love you to I hate you in 2 minutes, especially when you had no conflict with that person whatsoever. As he attempts to throw Miguel into a dungeon to keep him in the land of the dead for too long for him to be able to survive, he says, and Hector was my best friend. Success doesn't come free, Miguel. You have to be willing to do what it takes to seize your moment. I know you'll understand. Now, this again shouts out to the fact that Miguel could turn out the same way as De La Cruz if he gives into this addiction to music and this temptation to prioritize it above everything else in his life. And so you really do see De La Cruz as the harmful but inevitable end to the path that Miguel is just starting on. And Hector ended up probably about halfway down this path, because he did actually go forward and abandon his wife and child in order to pursue music. And so, he ended up a little farther down this path than Miguel did. However, he, in the end, manages to prevent that from happening to Miguel. And of course, Miguel seeing what De La Cruz actually is also kind of helped him see where he was headed. I guess, in the end, the real motivation for Ernesto De La Cruz was a worship of self and effectively being a sociopath. I just can't imagine being that unfeeling to where you will turn on somebody in an instant like that. He does this not only once, but twice, just in the course of this movie. We see him do it to Hector and to Miguel. So goodness knows how many other people he did this to while he was still alive. Not enough people to get caught, enough that everybody still remembers him fondly, but enough people that you can just see a hint of the fact that there's no remorse, no human emotion in him. Everything revolves around the worship of self for him, rather than, I just can't understand betraying a child instantly like that, a child who's never done you any harm, who you think you should feel protective over, who you should, view as your grandchild just a few minutes before that. And so to turn on a dime and be willing to do Miguel harm, to me, just blows my mind. I wouldn't do that to a kid I didn't know, let alone one that I thought I was related to 2 seconds ago. So, like I said, definitely agreeing with Disney on this one. He's a sociopath. There's no way a normal, healthy mind could do that to any child. And so that is kind of my summary of Ernesto De La Cruz. Now, if we know anything about Disney, they tend to build more and more and more media and more stories about each of their heroes and villains as time progresses. We started with Cinderella. Now we've got 3 or 4 Cinderella movies. We've got a couple Little Mermaid movies. We've got Tangled and Tangled the series. Most of these characters have popped up in Kingdom Hearts at one point or another. So who knows where they will move De La Cruz's story from here on. I know Coco was a big enough hit that they will probably try to gain more, let's just put it nicely, to gain more revenue from it at some point, and who knows if they will use that as an opportunity to expand on De La Cruz's character and give him more motivation besides mental and moral illness, or whether they'll explore a different villain in a different situation for Miguel. But either way, I'm pretty sure they're going to try to add to this universe at some point in the future. Who knows if it'll be really close, like Tangled and Tangled the series, or whether it'll be a decade apart like The Incredibles and Incredibles 2. But I have a feeling Miguel's story is not done, and with Miguel's story continuing, we will probably learn more about Ernesto De La Cruz. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and I'll look forward to talking to you Friday about Disney's Animal Kingdom. Have a great day.